Saba, thanks so much for being here.
Hi, thanks for having me.
We have some big topics to cover today, and
Yeah.
I'm excited. I was going through kind of the chronological order of like everything that you've talked about and everything that you've went through, and I was like, whoa, I'm like, this girl should write an autobiography like ASAP.
I don't think I'm there yet. I think that maybe in like 10, 20 years when I have like the sage wisdom of being older.
You don't need to be older. I mean, if I've learned anything in this podcast with all of the guests that I've interviewed, it's like you are way more wise than you think you are. Like you don't have to be an age to
Mm,
go through something, you know?
Honestly, that's a good point and like something that I try to keep in mind that like it is like obviously in the context of power dynamics, age is important, but in the context of life experience, it is just a number.
Yeah. And I mean, everything that we're going to talk about today, it's people our age that are still experiencing the things that you've
Mhm.
experienced. So it's like they want to hear about it now while they're experiencing it. They don't
Mm.
want to hear about it when they've also have the wisdom, you know?
Yeah, that's valid. Well, thank you. Maybe I'll start after this.
Literally after this at 2:30 p.m.
Yeah.
So to kick it off, the thing I always ask everyone is kind of what's going on lately. Is there anything that you've struggled or overcome kind of in the past couple of weeks or even anything that you're proud
Mhm.
of or accomplished?
That's so funny because I was actually thinking about this yesterday, and which is like funny that it like I don't know. I was like, oh yeah, I have this like interview that I'm gonna do where we talk about this stuff today. I'm like wondering what the like stream of consciousness or whatever was about that. But I so a year ago I was diagnosed, or like around a year ago, I was diagnosed with ADHD, and it's been interesting, and because I think that there are days where I just fully see how different I am when I like after my diagnosis and after I like started taking medication. And yesterday I was just having this like moment where I was just thinking about how possibly like how just like unwell or depressed or just not doing well I was. Obviously not just prior to the medication, like prior to like healing. And like how I couldn't even pick myself up during these moments and just seeing where I am now, where I'm like accomplishing things that I was really like dying to accomplish at that time, but didn't have like that confidence to has been really big. And to have hard weeks and know that they're just going to be like a day or a week versus a year. Whereas like when I was like in my early 20s, like I didn't know how long these like moods would last has been just it was just like a really rewarding experience. And I kind of had this like moment where I was feeling really proud of myself now and really hurting for that like young person in the past. And it's been really interesting to like combine those emotions and kind of have like deep empathy and sympathy for my past self and so much love for my like current self.
A lot of the times, the things we accomplish and the things that we go through, we don't slow down enough to sit down and reflect on basically how far we've come. And I did that recently. Yesterday or this weekend was 6 years for me in Toronto, and I moved to Toronto. Just I kind of overcame a few things in order to get to Toronto,
Mhm.
and just took a lot of like leaps of faith. But then when I was writing the post, I sat there and was like, girl, like you got to be proud of yourself. Like you've accomplished so much in 6 years, and it
Yeah.
takes that one leap of faith or that one decision, but you don't realize it until you take a moment to reflect and like, oh wow, look how far I've come. You know?
And people don't recognize how, like, when you're going through it, you're so right. When you're going through it, you're just like, oh my God, I just haven't done the things that I wanted to. But when you like actually look at the grand scheme of that time, you're like, oh my God, like it was just six
Yeah.
years ago. And congratulations, by the way.
Thanks.
Yeah, that you came here and your life has probably changed so much. And, 6 years can go by like that sometimes for
Mhm.
some folks.
And to bring it back to you, obviously, I find with everything you've went through mental health and whatnot, you probably are always still thinking, oh, it's not as good as it could be. But it's like you got to remember where you came from, where, like you said, something can happen today and a year ago you would have handled it and processed it very differently. But now knowing that you have all the tools to be able to get through it, that's huge.
Yeah. Yeah. And there is like this, like the morning is knowing that like you didn't have them before, but it's like there's like this, I think that when you get past that grieving process, you really are just like, but I have them now and I am just here now, and it's really wonderful.
I agree. Mental illness is always a huge topic for all age groups, but I find in the last, I don't know, 5, 10 years, it's been people are becoming a lot more aware of what's going on within themselves and having the right words and the right phrases and the right vocabulary to be able to talk about something they know they've been experiencing their entire lives. And like I said from the beginning of this podcast, we have some big topics to talk about, but it's going to really paint the picture where someone's going to understand, like, no wonder Saba like felt this way, or like it got to this point based on all of the hardships that she's been given growing up. And I want to talk about some of those. So one of the biggest things I want to talk to you about is privilege, and how you noticed growing up how different your upbringing was from your peers. And I have similar stories, but obviously not to the extent of yours. But definitely as you're growing up, you start noticing class and noticing wealth and the differences between you and other kids. So what is your first memory that you can remember of like, okay, I have a very different childhood and upbringing and way of life than everyone around me?
Mm-hmm. So I should like preface this by saying that when I was growing up in Houston, I didn't feel that excluded from the community. Like I didn't feel the people around me were so different from me, because actually like a lot of them had this like very similar experiences. If not, I had experienced like much more strife than me. And we're not like, arguing like about who has more, and just like in the context of, how historically how some like communities were treated, and especially like in the last couple of years. And so I think that it was a really big leap then to move back to Canada. So I'm from Toronto Scarborough area, and then I moved to Houston, Texas when I was younger, and then we came back here when I was around 14, and that was the biggest, I think, shock. And there was a culture shock there because I hadn't been in Toronto for so long, and then there was also the weather shock. There was all those things, but then when I moved we moved to Scarborough, and then we moved into a suburb with my mom called Pickering, which is just on the east end of Scarborough, like in the outskirts a little bit. And that was big because I never really was around white folks growing up until I was like around 14, 15. Yeah. So
Okay,
that was huge. Yeah.
Really? In Houston? I didn't realize it was that culture.
Yeah. Well, I think it's
Or I guess just the
also,
neighborhood, maybe?
I think it's a
Yeah.
neighborhood. I actually had a really interesting conversation with the mom of an ex of mine, and she grew up playing tennis and she would travel a lot.
Mhm.
And I mentioned like that I was from Houston, and I was like, yeah, like I never really grew up around white people. And she made a really good point of saying, like that was probably intentional. There are communities through the history of the United States that were like pretty much divided. Communities were divided. And so it is just the pattern of these communities just constantly having to stay in certain neighborhoods, because it's not like, I don't think white people didn't exist in Toronto,
No,
in Houston.
Yeah.
But I do think that maybe we were just in different neighborhoods.
So you feel that you didn't realize the different levels of privilege until you came back to the Toronto area.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
talk about that. Like
totally.
Pickering, yeah, is a decently
Yeah.
well-off area outside Toronto.
Yeah, it was just, I remember one time a girl in my gym class in the locker room saying, someone was like, oh, I like your skirt. And she was like, oh, thanks. It was $300. I was like, what?
And this is like the early 2000s.
Yeah, it was so wild. It was like, I was like, oh my God, like I could never, and it was just like kind of like those really big moments that I noticed, going to people's houses and seeing the difference. And granted, we had a house as well, but it was just like inside is always different. And just like the day-to-day experiences of going to school and in a majority white school. And because like now I feel like there's a lot of integration, and, there's lots of like conversations you can have about how urban planning kind of decides this. But there is a lot of racialized communities in Pickering now, but back then I think it was just a new thing happening, that a lot of people were moving into the Pickering area. And so I think there was also like a lot of tension around that. I remember like having a lot of backhanded comments said to me in high school about being brown. And like I did not know how to respond because, in movies, when I would watch racism happen, because I was literally around only people of color when I was growing up in Houston. So obviously we said like shitty things about each other as like racist, but like at that time it was like jabs that we had learned from our parents and like communal kind of jokey thing that was happening versus here it was just like racism. You know what I mean? It was anger. It was
Hate,
misunderstanding of,
ignorance.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It was ignorance. And I would hear backhanded comments all the time and no one would do anything about it, even though it's so clear that the teacher heard the comment. And that sticks out to me. And even the things that people would say, like, oh, I went to summer camp this year, and like these types of things, I guess. Yeah.
How do you think that affected one, your confidence, but also your ability to want to be friends with these people growing up?
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. I think that my confidence was really affected. I think that it was a really hard knock on me. And you have to also remember that I'm 14. I am so a child mind. I have just moved multiple times. And I'm not just dealing with school, I'm also dealing with like my family issues. And those things would just, you just in general are unconfident in those moments. And then coming in and feeling really just outcasted was a lot. But also, like, I was so shy, I couldn't even make those connections if I wanted to. And I did, I really wanted to. And I just remember feeling really nervous all the time. But it was interesting because I also really wanted to be like them. Like I also really wanted to like engross myself into that culture or like the type of culture that you like kind of find yourself in. And, I find myself in like that like artsy scene and, wanting to replicate the like white women that were like in the scene. And knowing that you never will is like a really hard thing to contend to. And like, I'm just someone who is very much like a problem solver. So when I had to contend with that, I think that I was like, what is this? How to solve this problem? What do I do? And I think it was shutting my feelings down, like, I think that that was like how my brain could fix the problem. And yeah, that was what I did.
Who do you lean on in those moments? Like, do you go to your mom to understand, like, why are they saying this about us? Like, does it
Mm,
affect how you view your own culture? And does it make you want to not talk about who you really are? There's so many levels of it.
yeah. Yeah, I like really didn't lean on anyone at that time. I don't think that I had the ability to understand what I was feeling. I don't think that I could even emote what I was feeling. So I didn't lean on anyone at the time. I think obviously that's like in the context of I'm a human and obviously I'm going to have moments where I will talk to someone, but a regular person, no. I think that maybe the most regular might have been my older cousin at the time. And also, once I did make friends, there was people who were like racialized that we could bitch together a little bit, but
You have common ground. You understand what each other are
yeah,
going through.
exactly. And so, but in that time, and this is like high school time, I don't think that I was ever really grounded enough in those friendships. I think that my like foot was always like one foot out the door.
Yeah. I think about being 14, 15, and the shit that white girls say to other white girls, let alone when you bring race into it.
Yeah.
You think, thinking back, especially in high school, do you think the racism, whether how big or small the comment is, comes from hate or comes from just like serious ignorance?
Hmm. So I think it comes from serious ignorance and not understanding what you're feeling. You are
Yeah.
feeling uncomfortable and scared and angry that someone is saying that maybe you're bad because like of a history that you had no control
Yeah.
over, and that's
They
not what
feel
they're
attacked.
saying, but they
Yeah.
feel attacked. Yeah. And you know what? Like on a human level, I understand that feeling, obviously on like the grounds of like being dated in this world and having my own lived experience. I'm like, okay, get over it. But I think that I can understand if I look at it from an outside perspective, I can understand how maybe in 10, 20, 30, whatever years, if someone like made a history book page about this moment, they could break it down to like how this person's feelings were maybe affected by years of like unrecognized prejudices that were being implanted into them. Right. But, in the lived moment, obviously there's anger, there's dislike, and there's wanting to like, no, I don't want to be around this person. And I will say, though, I think the meanest, most forward things that I ever experienced were by white men, I will say. And it was just like brutal stuff, and scary stuff. And so that's really, I think,
rooted in hate for sure.
Rooted in hate for sure. And rooted in like a masculinity complex that is so it's just deep. Scary. It's so deep. And the stuff with girls is that like, I empathize with women a lot. Like I'm AFAB, identify as non-binary. I use she, they pronouns, but I live in this body and I am a very femme presenting person. And I grew up AFAB, which is assigned female at birth. And so I really empathize with how girls are like told to experience the world. And so I feel like teenage girls get a bad rap. So I think like, I just feel like a little bit, I don't know. It's kind of like, I almost feel like the racism I experienced from them was like, kind of like them knowing that they have this one thing above me. And it's like a power thing in that versus like maybe I'm being kinder to them than I am like white men, but like the racism from white men was just like terrifying for me. Yeah. You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you're saying, because I didn't want to diminish your experience at all, but I find a lot of teenage girls, it's not what they're saying is not really racism. Like they probably would have said similar stuff to you if you look just like them. Teenage they girls like are scary sometimes.
Yeah, they just don't like anyone, and they're really unconfident, and they're dealing with so much pressure on being like the baddest bitch in the room, and also like are hated by like everyone. Like we hate each other when we're teenage girls because we're conditioned to think that we have to be jealous of each other. Yeah. Like teenage boys are like told to like be aroused by them, but also be mad. And you know what? There's so much like vehement anger that is like target towards teenage girls, especially, that I just like understand why someone would use something that they know is a tool. That being said, it's not saying that like white women aren't racist, obviously. And it's not saying that like power tool can't be used in like terrible ways and that there shouldn't be accountability for you saying those things. It's just that the things that I experienced from them at least was like the like bitey stuff, that I can handle, I guess.
We've been teenage girls. It's being a teenage girl, you're probably you're equipped for the world.
Fine.
I want to tangent a little bit, but not much. You grew up Muslim, still yes. Like, you're still like religious and still, what word am I looking for?
Practicing, maybe?
Still practicing. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I grew up Muslim. I identify culturally as Muslim. I think that's like a funny thing that people maybe make fun of when you say identify culturally as a religion. But like when you are from a community, it is really, I think it does really just make sense that I would say that.
A big part of your experience and how the outside world views you. And I think you made a really interesting point where you were living in Texas as Muslim during 9/11.
Yeah.
Talk about that experience. That day. I bet we all remember that day for reasons, but I'm very intrigued if you remember a stark difference of how you were perceived before 9/11 and afterwards, or just you and your neighborhood and family.
Yeah. So it's so funny because I've actually literally never talked about my experience out loud, except for maybe with my therapist, and maybe said one-off things, which is I was like, oh wow, I've never actually talked about this. But what happened that day so also so funny because like, George Bush was the president at the time, and there was like this like kind of this weird thing of also being from the state that George Bush was from for a
Right.
lot of people,
So
for
he was
me at
living in
least.
Texas at the time. Well, I guess he's living in DC
No,
now,
no,
but
no.
yeah,
He's
but he's
living in
originally
DC,
from
but like,
Texas.
but he is like a prominent, like,
But he started probably as a governor in Texas, no, or no?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I don't know. Like yeah, we'll fact check later.
Yeah.
But like literally, like the school beside mine was called George Bush High School. You know what or George Bush
Got
Middle
it.
School. So it's like that. Like he is like a prominent. Like the
Prominent
family
figure in the
is
state. Yeah.
a prominent figure. And so yeah, I remember I was in fifth grade. Like it was just like got really quiet all of a sudden in class, and the teachers kept whispering, and we could tell something was going on, and we were really confused because there was lots of like frantic energy around us, but we were just working. And then
But
we
you
got let
knew
home.
things were happening.
Something was happening. We didn't understand. We didn't understand what though. And then we were told to go home. Like we were told that school was gonna end early and that we were going home. And then I remember getting home and watching the news with my parents, but still not really fully understanding what was going on. But my parents seemed really, really just captured and really like focused, and not like they were like worried. I was a hijabi. I wore a hijab. And the next day, my mom was like, and okay, I wore a hijab, but I wasn't really that great of a Muslim girl. Like I had HHG. So like, I was very much like the Molvi Sahib, we call them, but they're like the people that help us learn the Quran, was always so mad at me because I could never finish the actual practicing of it. Cause I got so bored all the time. Like I just wasn't really into praying. Like which is like so shitty to say, but like, I didn't understand how those things could, like as an adult, I'm like really grateful for these things that I know about Islam. Like praying is like a really great form of meditation and all these wonderful things that Islam has to offer that I practice spiritually. But like, at the time I was like, what is this? And the only thing I found fun was when I went to like Muslim school, like Sunday school, like adjacent version. And we would just talk about stories because I really have loved stories my entire life. So that was like the only time. And so
probably like social time.
Yeah. And so the only reason I really was a hijabi was because my best friend was. and I was like, I want to be hijabi too. And so my mom was like, sure. But then that next day, my mom was like, you're not wearing that anymore.
Wow.
Yeah, she was like, you're not wearing that anymore. And maybe I went back to it once or twice after like it was kind of like, okay, it's not that scary because, I feel like there was a moment that I also wore it in the 6th grade, but again, took it off. But I'm like, did this happen in 6th grade, 5th grade, whatever? It happened at that time. But yeah, my mom definitely was like, you're not wearing that anymore. I don't want people to know you're Muslim. Because we're also like Tanner, and we lived in a majority neighborhood of a lot of Black and brown people and like other communities that were also brown skinned. And so
probably people from Mexico. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and so I like, my mom was like, people won't think that you're, you're brown if you're Muslim.
Yeah, you could easily pass for Brazilian or
yeah, exactly.
anything.
Yeah. And I know that privilege as well. But like, so yeah, my mom was like, you're not wearing that anymore. I remember feeling like, okay, prepare for the bad stuff to come, because that's what I kept hearing, that people who were Muslim and not Muslim, who just looked Muslim, were being attacked all over the country. And so I was prepared. I think that I only really got one really fucked up comment from like maybe the one out of 3 white girls that went to my school. I think after that, there wasn't really much in the communities, like in my circle, that talked about this. But I think that then afterwards, there was lots of systemic things that started happening that started to deteriorate certain communities and certain families in the neighborhood, including ours.
Yeah. Anything top of mind? Anything specific of like how you over the years? So yeah. This is in grade 5. You're there for a couple more years before you come to Toronto.
Yeah.
Did you see the growth of the systemic racism after that?
Yeah, like it's so interesting because, my mom will tell you, it's funny because my mom, says that, we weren't really kicked out of America, but I think that when I say we were like basically kicked out, I'm talking about the like ways that we like kept getting lack of ability to stay there. And then it's to the point where continuously applying to stay there was not worth it because we could not even afford to be able to exist there. And so we had the privilege of being a Canadian instead of like someone from Pakistan. So my mom was like, what are we doing? Our family's in Canada, because my mom is the first generation immigrant of my family. So her family moved here. And so she was like, we are citizens of Canada. My entire family's there. I want to see my mom. I need my support because my brother was dealing with a lot of mental health issues. And it was just hard. And my dad couldn't even come back to the States. And he wasn't really present overall, but he couldn't even come back to kind of play the face of the man of the house. And so that's how it happens. And then, so the things that I can maybe really, really cement is that immigration became so difficult for people, and you were lucky. And this is anyone from any race who isn't white. You were lucky if you got that green card beforehand, because I know families that have lost everything trying to stay in America. And I had like people, like peers, who were like, they're telling me I have to go back to so-and-so country, and I haven't been there since I was 1. How can I go back? Like, I don't, my entire
or the people
life
who literally have never been, and people say, oh, go
yeah,
back to your countries.
yeah.
I was born here.
Yeah, but also like, how do you expect me to like cement myself back into that culture when I am in all of my identity American? Like, this is my culture, you know? And so that was the biggest thing I think I noticed.
It blows my mind. Just
how.
Well, like I said, I've heard that comment so many times. I mean, I work in real estate in Toronto. The racism I see in this business is insanity. And being a white girl from the East Coast, it's like there wasn't many people of any other religious background or cultural background. Obviously, I knew of people. I'm not in a bubble by any means, but it's like I didn't really see people experiencing racism a lot around me until I moved to Toronto, and then especially until I got into real estate. It's shocking. But what I've learned, my experience of working in real estate, it's not white people hating other races. It's other races that both get discriminated against hating each other.
Yeah, lateral violence. Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah,
it was shocking to me to see. Yeah. Because I always thought really it was often like white people being the most racist. That's what I grew up thinking.
Yeah, I think that's an unfortunate cause and effect of just white supremacy, is this need to think that you're above other people. And, you know, as a brown person, I see a lot of anti-Black and other antis in my community. And, you know, it's like really, I think that I see a lot of people in my generation and younger really understanding it and doing the work of calling it in and recognizing what privilege actually means versus like it's being attacked. And I really hope that, I think that it is just doing the work of calling it out when you see it for that. And yeah, it's really unfortunate. I too have seen a lot of lateral violence coming from so many angles, and I get it, because there's this like anger that your community was harmed in some way. And sometimes it's easier to get angry at another community for being loud about it as well, or just being different, than it is to be angry at your oppressor. And I think that's just like racism. Like that's like years of conditioning to believe that like white people are not accountable for what they do, you know? And so, yeah, like, I don't know, it's sad. And I really hope that it stops. Yeah.
I want to switch gears. I want to talk about the type of childhood you grew up in, and then how that relates to you coming out as non-binary.
That's interesting. Yeah. Thanks for asking that. I feel like
what was your family's reaction? Did you feel like you were able to have that conversation and make that stance?
I'm not out to everyone in my family. Like it's okay though. Like, don't worry about it. Like I think that it's like one of those things that I am still kind of figuring out how to be more public about in myself. And so I don't think it's like a thing of fear. It's more of a thing of, I feel weird about talking about myself and my vulnerabilities. So it's like really hard for me. And this is something that I think queerness is the final frontier of my discomfort, and like kind of coming to understand it and my
You
own
okay with it?
internalized, yeah, and my own internalized homophobia and what that is,
Interesting.
and so I think that for me, I learned about non-binary from, other like the trans community, the
Yeah.
queer community when I was older. I think that when I turned like 23 is when I like started learning about these terms and like
Yeah.
understanding them and trying to understand them.
What
And
about the terms did you feel like, finally something that describes me?
yeah, I think that there was this discomfort in me being acknowledged as like a girl and a woman when I was younger. And that's so weird because I really love feminine things. Like I really love quote unquote girly things. Like I am such like I always whenever I try to like butch it up, it just does not work. Like it's like my essence is like a really feminine energy. And I love that about
Absolutely.
myself. But I also really did not like feeling tied to the structures of like woman,
And what was
and
expected of if you are
yeah,
one?
and yeah, but also just like the body and like I just didn't see my body like that, I guess. I think that I understood that and I just thought that that was like my plight in life, and it's
Okay.
been really cool to see how people are like, well, you don't have to live like that. You can live outside those binaries, and it's just your journey. Like it doesn't have to fit into the certain way that people assign queerness or fluidity or like being gender fluid. It can be your own thing. And for my job we like partner and we work a lot with like community organizations, and like discussing this with the 519 when we like was really amazing because I think that was probably like one of my most validating moments when we were there doing some event and having this discussion around like not assuming what people are by how they look, because there could be so many reasons why someone looks a certain way. It's like cultural, and it can be so interlaced with wanting to feel safe, being from like a specific culture, not wanting to be excommunicated from certain families, or just, feeling comfortable in like what you are, but like knowing that there is a part of you that is different, or like, yeah, you aren't ascribed to the heteronormative world. And so I think that was like probably a really big experience for me to like hear that from like also like someone who is older, who's experienced more and can confidently tell you like you're stressing too much,
Has it been harder not coming out as non-binary, or has it been harder since you have kind of put that
Mm.
stand down?
It's funny. Harder is like tricky because I think that anytime you keep something to yourself, it is just there's a safety. So it did feel easy because I could be secure in the fact that only I knew and I could know that, but judge it in any way, And there's also the sadness is not feeling seen in
Yeah.
some way. But I think that honestly, this is like maybe a comment on the people that I like surround myself around, but like I just got nothing but love and support from friends,
Good.
I really just got nothing but support. And I think that just being maybe in the lane of the communities that I'm in, I'm pretty good at like being like, I don't feel good in this space, so I'm gonna leave. And I don't feel good for whatever reason. I don't have to like stick with this person or
Good.
this group. So
People,
like I've
many people
never
don't have that skill set or confidence.
yeah,
Again.
yeah, like I just, and then, it's like a new skill, but I definitely have learned it. And so I think that because of that, I didn't really experience any like misunderstanding in the way that maybe others have.
Mm.
And like, again, like I'm not really fully out to my family, and that is just like another thing. So who knows what that will be like. I think it is like the discomfort of even talking about like relationships in like a
Yeah.
Muslim family is hard to like even bring up like this other thing feels like really difficult.
Do you think
Um,
once you bring it up, it'll come as a package deal?
what do you mean?
Like if you bring up relationships and queerness and non-binary, do
Mm,
you think to help your family understand, do you think you'll kind of open all of those boxes at once?
yeah, I think so. Like I think that
They all
yeah,
interconnect.
mingle, yeah, interconnect.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think it would have to be like a big conversation, and because it's also like I'm dealing with the worry of them not maybe understanding what it is. And I don't know how to explain that.
Do you feel like you're still figuring it out? So you want to figure it out
Yeah,
before you have to explain it to someone else. But you're like, I'm not an
exactly.
expert yet, so I don't want to go through
Yeah,
the
that's
trouble of
actually
kind of botching explaining it to you.
That's actually so, yeah, that's exactly it. Thanks for naming it. Like not knowing how to like describe it to myself even at
Mm,
this time.
right. Do you have the type of family that love you no matter what?
Yeah,
Just may
yeah,
have good. But it
yeah,
usually is a generational thing that just like
yeah.
it's new to them. They don't understand. So it's not that they're
Hmm.
trying to say, don't be who you are. They just, yeah, they can't wrap their heads around it a lot of the time.
Yeah. And I think like for me, these relationships are like ones that we've had to build and work on. And so like
Yeah.
I think this is just something that I'm not ready for yet. And there will be a time that I am, but like it is, like I am rebuilding a lot of these connections. And so I really want to honor the time that I feel comfortable in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, what I want to ask you about next is the time you checked yourself into CAMH.
Mm-hmm.
That is
Yeah.
so much courage and bravery, and even just like self awareness.
Thanks. Thanks. I really, yeah, like I really think that it's not something that I give myself credit for enough, but it's just like when you're in that low of a moment, it's like really hard to.
And I
And I
mean,
really,
it wasn't recent. Like you said, in
mm,
2018, you had the realization to take yourself to CAMH because you realized in that moment that something worse is going to happen if I don't change something here or do something about it.
yeah, exactly. And it was just like I was at the lowest point and I was like, this can't be it. And I knew that I didn't want to die, but I also knew that I didn't want to live. And I was like, this is a problem because I'm living in
What's in
this
the
in
middle, right?
yeah, like I'm just in this in between that I can't understand. And I think that was just like the lowest low that I need to get
Mm.
to. And shout out to like my best friends, Ashley and Jules for literally like me saying, I think I need to go to CAMH, but I don't want to do it alone. And them being like, we'll go with you, like, and sitting there with me while I get like an assessment and all that stuff and driving me back. And, like having that like community around me that will take me. And that really helped me also want to know what I can do for others. And, that gesture, like I'm telling you, that gesture of just saying, like, do you need someone to go with? So validating. Or like just someone taking care of you by saying, like, I will come with you is a really important thing, I think. But just putting it out there.
Why do you think people don't make that step to check themselves into somewhere like CAMH? Why is it so scary?
Oh, it's so funny because I think that I get it. Like I get it because you don't think I think, maybe there's different experiences, different reasons, but I like mental illness is so wild because you don't think that you have it. You don't really think you have. At least for me, I didn't feel like I had it until I saw the other side. And I was like, oh, you were so depressed. You were so
You didn't realize it
depressed.
could be better, or not everyone
Yeah.
feels this way. I think it's a
Yeah,
a way to say
exactly.
it.
Yes, exactly. That's actually great. Unless, or for me, it was because I think I grew up with it and it was just something that I had.
Mhm.
So I didn't realize that things could be better. And that was something that a doctor really told me because, I went off my medication by myself, like cold turkey, as they say, which I don't recommend. And I had a bad doctor at the time who like was really didn't validate the experience of needing it. So I felt not this pressure, but this validation and just stopping, without a discussion. And so I really didn't recognize that something was wrong until the drastic things started happening, until I was like, couldn't sleep, but couldn't like, till like I was sleeping until my body would hurt, or like I was so
Wow.
tired that like I couldn't do anything. I was
What
like,
does that look
that's
like though? Going to bed at a normal time and then sleeping the entire next day until the next night?
Yeah, like literally would
Yeah.
do that. Like I would be like, I'm so tired. I'm gonna go to bed early. I would go to bed and I just couldn't get up until like the next night at 11. And then I'm
Wow.
wired and I'm, like that. And or I didn't want to sleep because I was scared of what it would feel like to wake up, because that was like the worst moment for me was waking up. And so those were the big things. Like those, I was like, this is really affecting me. And just like the way that I was behaving in relationships, like in romantic and friendships. I was like, I don't like who I'm becoming, I don't like this person who is like neurotic and spiraling and cannot maintain these relationships. My biggest critic is myself. And so sometimes when you are that, you can know when you're not being your best self, you know? And so, yeah, but I understand when people don't want to go from fear, because I know people are afraid that they will get checked in some way. And I can't like attest to every experience, but I don't think it's like that. Like, I don't think it's like something that it's not going to be like a strapped down experience that I think TV has kind of made it to seem. But, you know, like I understand the risk of feeling like, maybe what if they put you into something that you don't want to be in?
Yeah.
Or what if no one listens to you? Or what if, you know? And so, yeah, like I get that. I get that.
Yeah, almost that you're told what you're feeling is not real, and then you feel worse off than before you went.
And like, you know, those bad experiences in these spaces do exist. These are like public service spaces, and they deal with, as much as you want them to be perfect, they're not going to be, and harm has been done in those spaces. So I understand the fear of being around them, but they're also like there for us to utilize.
Mm-hmm. You said that once CAMH diagnosed you with ADHD, PTSD, and major depression and anxiety, then you dove headfirst into therapy. And really, you said you took a break from everything and really took your healing really seriously. Did you notice the difference therapy had on you right away?
Yeah, I really did, because I was crying all the time. And I was like, it was a different crying. It was like this like cathartic crying, you know, and
you're like it just keeps coming and coming.
Yeah. Like when I was at CAMH, they diagnosed me with PTSD, depression, and anxiety. But then it was only a couple years ago that I was diagnosed with ADHD, and that was, I think, because my friends would talk to me about work, and I would be like, this is what I'm experiencing when I like do work. And they were like, I'm just letting you know, like, I have ADD, and like I was experiencing the same thing. And that's what got me to check that out. But then before that, in 2018, I just had a moment with my therapist where like I told her what the catalyst was for like my need to go to CAMH, which was like this really bad like interaction I had with an ex of mine. And then it was such an interesting conversation because, you know, she wanted me to learn how to hold myself accountable to not having to stay in relationships that like are not serving me, you know, like, oh, like
was that a crazy idea to you?
Yeah, that was crazy for me. Yeah, that was like
knowing that you're allowed to cut people off.
I didn't understand people were treating me badly. Like, I didn't know that was how people, like, you don't have to be treated the way that you don't like, you know, I didn't understand that. And at that time, like, I didn't know that was bad treatment, you know? And I think that's like what people need to understand when it comes to like abuse, is that like, you don't realize sometimes, you know, and not to say that these were just shitty guys, you know, like these weren't abusive people, but they were just shitty people. And
sometimes emotional abuse is sometimes I'd rather get punched.
Yeah, honestly. But like, I remember, like her kind of talking me through these like relationships that I had that were all so toxic, so volatile, that had happened in the span of all in a year of each other. And like, she wasn't saying you're responsible for this, but she was saying, you know, let's talk about what you saw the first time and what you didn't like and why you didn't get out of it then, you know, and why you denied yourself, you're not liking that. And that was the door that opened everything. And then after that, it quickly led to the why. And then it was her validating. She just sat there for literally like maybe 6 months to a year, just validating my childhood and experience and saying like, that was tough, that like your childhood was like exceptional in a lot of ways, and you were allowed to be angry. And so, you know, like, I think that it validated needing to grieve for so long. I think that I spent maybe like a good 7 years without realizing it, just grieving these experiences that I had. And then by the time I was in therapy, I was ready to take the next step, you know? And the last thing I'll say about this is that it wasn't easy. Like, I remember after the day that she like sat me down and like we sat through these toxic relationships, and she asked me like about when I saw them and why I didn't leave in certain moments, and like we discussed like the narrative I was building in my head versus what was really happening. I told her, I was like, I feel really embarrassed. Like that was really hard for me to acknowledge. And because you do have to like then remember that you are also a person in this relationship and you feel stupid for not leaving. And she just was like, you're not stupid. I'm not doing this to make you feel bad. I'm doing this for you to recognize a pattern of behavior and know that we all have patterns and that it comes from somewhere. So let's dig deeper now.
Yeah, because you're not able to break that pattern unless you truly understand where the pattern stems from, so that you can make that conscious choice of, I will break this pattern this time.
Yeah,
you're not just going to
totally.
stop a bad habit or a pattern if you don't understand why and where it's coming
from. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, relationships. That's a whole other ball game.
Yeah.
It is all, I always say relationships are the mirror we do not want to look in.
Oh my God. Are they ever?
Like it's showing you everything you still need to heal. And it's like, can I just enjoy this relationship?
Yeah. Even dating shows you that. You're like, oh my God, I don't like this part of myself.
I know sometimes it's easier to be alone. I don't have to deal with any of my crap.
Yeah.
Let someone else deal with it.
Truly like feel like the most teenage self when I'm like starting to like have a crush or like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And then when you're in the relationship, all of your bad habits and qualities are being shown. And then you're like, but still love me, even though I'm being a shitty person right now, but I have to take accountability. And oh God, that's the book I could write. Holy hell.
I'll read it.
Right? Okay, last couple things I want to start concluding with. I loved what you said when you said sometimes the worst moments are the most pivotal because it forces you to act. And you said, I mean, the way I see it, it's like that's precisely what this podcast is about. But I find it even more interesting that after all of this, you still feel sad that you didn't have a conventional upbringing, but you wouldn't be who you are right now if you literally didn't have that life. So do you think you'll get to a point where you'll appreciate all of the hardships and the childhood that you were handed?
Yeah, I think I'm already getting there. I think even from that time that I answered that question, like I feel different. And I think that I think when you're in like a young state, like young mind or like a childlike mind, you really are like, I wish I had what other people have. And I wish I was normal. And, you know, the older I get, the more I realize that there's no such thing. And everyone has experiences and everyone story gets richer as they grow older, and that it's just part of my life, you know. It just is like it just is, and I get to build a meaning around it, you know. And
you get
not
to choose
the
narrative.
And not to say that it doesn't mean that I do not hold people accountable. I do not see the harm in the things that happen to me, or I do not see the violence or the systemic violence that happened to me. It's just that I get to shape how I feel after those events.
And there's a lot of power in that. And it's a lot of people don't realize they have that power.
Yeah, exactly.
I find it's one of those things that are like brokenly beautiful, where I find the most beautiful, vibrant people are probably some of the people who have went through some of the most hardships in their life and who go through daily hardships of just the nature of whether the communities they're in or the nature of the struggles they're going through. But I want to say, like, you have such a vibrancy and beautifulness to you. No, it's true.
Oh, you're so sweet.
No, you can tell there's just so much depth and like levels to you. And I find that makes a person really, really great.
Oh,
like, you know what I mean?
Thanks. Yeah.
You're not a surface level person, and I appreciate that.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you so much. That's really nice to hear. I think that, you know, I spent so long being sad. Why not try happy?
Yeah. Let's try something new on.
Why not try feeling good about things? And I think the journey has really helped me do that. Like the taking the time to heal, and also taking the time to heal my relationship with my relationships in general and my family and stuff. It's been really nice.
Yeah. Anyone listening today that has either been through everything that you've been through that maybe have not taken the steps to heal or maybe uncover and discover, or maybe someone who today is going through maybe deciding if maybe they fit into a more non-binary world, or maybe they're like, do I check myself into CAMH? There's so many levels of what we've talked about, but like Any last kind of words of advice for anyone listening today?
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to phrase this, but there was this like excerpt from a book that I worked on, and it was a story about this Vietnamese person and her conversation with her father, who had experienced the Vietnam War or the aftermaths of the Vietnam War. And at the end, he describes this harrowing journey to coming to Canada, and she's bawling. Like, I'm reading it as an editor, and I'm bawling. And at the end, I think she asked the question, like, how do you experience life? And he goes, no stress, and I feel like I think that I was constantly so stressed about my experience. I was constantly so focused on like, how do I feel better? How do I feel better? How do I feel better faster? How do I heal faster? How do I figure this out faster? And it's not going to be faster. Like, it's going to take the time that it takes. And that's your personal journey. I think that I've always been so focused on like, how do I catch up to everyone? And if anyone is going through that experience, there's no catching up. You just have what you have. And I'm not like, that sounds really blunt of me to say, but I'm not saying that in a mean way. I'm saying that it's going to take the time it takes. And of course, it's going to take the time it takes because you just went through that very specific thing that you as a human, as an individual in this world, could only know how you feel about, So be kinder to yourself. Let it take the time it takes. Do what you need to do. I'm 30 years old and I just got braces and I moved back home with my mom. So I think that if I can do that and feel happy, like, I think that it's okay to take the time that it takes.
I love that, by the way. There's the irony of almost like going through your childhood once again with the braces living back at home. And it's totally. Almost like, I don't know if you want to like dig deeper into that just like on your own time, but it's almost like you get a second chance of being that teenager again.
Honestly, dude, like my therapist is always like, it's like you're recreating your childhood.
That's what I'm saying.
And I was like, honestly, yes.
I recognize that right away.
Yeah. No, it's great. I love it. I see it and I love it and I accept it.
If anyone would like to connect with you further, where can they connect with you?
You can follow me on Instagram. My Instagram is _sabotage. So that's _SABATOGE. And yeah, that's me.
Such a cool username.
Thank you. Shout out to Jess Filed, my friend from high school who made the pun the first time. And then I took it in 2012 and it just ran with it.
I love it. Yeah. Saba, it's been an absolute pleasure helping you share your story. Because I know this is kind of a lot of the first times you're talking about things, but I hope today sparks a genuine hope that you do write a book. So if you want the transcript to start it, here you go.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. No, thanks so much for having me. It was really such a treat. And so it's such an honor to like be able to say those things. And yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Thank you.